I'm Debbi Michiko Florence. I'd first like to thank the Asian Author Alliance for hosting these Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month panels and videos. And I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Our panel is We Contain Multitudes. Supporting diversity within Asian American voices with an emphasis on middle grade. We are going to share our experiences as Asian Americans and how our backgrounds influence the stories we write. And we hope to show you that there's a need for many Asian American pen novels to reflect the diversity of the Asian American experience. So I think we'll start out by introducing ourselves and maybe sharing one or two middle grade novels that we've written or that are coming out.
Hi, I'm Andrea Wang, and I am the author of picture books. The most recent one, I'm going to break the rules, Debbie, and show a picture book. This Watercress just came out at the end of March, and I will be talking today about my debut middle grade, The Many Meanings of Melan, which comes out August 17th. So that's me, and I'll hand it off to Christina.
Hello, everybody. I'm Christina Soontornvat, and I'm so excited to be here because I'm such a huge fan of the people who are on this panel. It's awesome. I am the author of several middle grade books. So my latest middle grade novel was A Wish in the Dark, and that came out about a year ago. And I have a middle grade nonfiction that also came out last year. It was awesome to have so many books out last year. It was a great year to have multiple books out. All 13. So this is the nonfiction story of the Thai cave rescue. And I'm just so excited to be here. Popcorn to Mike.
Hello. I am also really thrilled to be here with this group of people. I earlier tweeted that I was just going to spend the whole time telling them how fabulous they are, and I just might. But my name is Mike Jung. I'm also a middle grade author. I'm less of a rule breaker than that Andrea Wang. So here's my middle grade. My most recent one is called The Boys in the Back Row, which came out in October of last year. I also wrote this book back here, Unidentified Suburban Object, and that's a poster of some of the illustrations from my first book, Geeks, Girls, and Secret Identities. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here with this group of people. So on to you, Veera.
Thank you. I am also thrilled to be here with all of you. It's just really nice to see everybody, even if we're not in person. But I'm Veera Hiranandani, and my most recent middle grade book is The Night Diary. And I also wrote the whole story of Half a Girl. And I have a book coming out in September called How to Find What You're Not Looking For. So that is me.
Exciting. And yes, I am so thrilled to be here with you all. I wish we were all hanging out together in person, maybe someday soon. Like I said, I'm Debbi Michiko Florence, and my debut middle grade novel, Keep It Together, Keiko Carter, came out last year. And I have a companion novel coming out on August 5th, the first week of August. Just Be Cool, Jenna Sakai. So why don't we get started? How about, why don't you tell us a little bit about what it was like for you growing up Asian American, and like where you grew up, what generation you are, and anything you want to share about your family life experiences or school experiences.
I identify as Chinese American. My parents were both born in mainland China and immigrated to the United States in the 60s after the visa thing opened up in 1965, and settled in the Boston area, met each other there. That's where I was born. When I was 2, we moved to very rural Ohio, and that's where I spent the next 11 or 12 years. So I did most of my young childhood growing up in rural Ohio. If you've read Watercress, then you know that I did feel othered as a child. I was the only Asian American in my grade for the entire time that I went through public school there. There was only one other Chinese American family in town, and so we hung out with them a lot. But until I moved back to the Boston area when I was 13, I really did not see a lot of people who looked like me in my town or in my classes. So I write about that a lot. Yeah, I will pass that off to Christina now.
Oh, Andrea, I feel like I've heard your story before. I've heard you talk about your background before, but it's just hearing it again is reminding me like we have a lot of things in common, even though our families are so different. And you grew up in Ohio, and I grew up in Texas. So I'm Thai American. My dad immigrated to the United States, same wave, late 60s. I think he immigrated in 68 from Thailand with his brother and a bunch of friends. So he immigrated to Los Angeles and then moved to Texas, and that's where he met my mom. So my mom's family is white, and they, like many generations of Texans, she grew up in West Texas, like the total opposite of Thailand, like dry oil fields, like cowboys, tumbleweeds. And then so they met and got married, and I was born in Dallas. And my dad realized that there was a small town about an hour and a half west of Dallas called Weatherford. And in the whole county, there was not a single Asian restaurant. So he saw this business opportunity, and he moved us to Weatherford to start the first Asian restaurant. It was a Chinese restaurant, even though we're not Chinese. I mean, like way, way back we are. But at that time in the 80s, nobody had heard of Thailand, and people didn't know Thai food. And of course, like we were a Chinese restaurant, but we're selling, American Chinese food, right? So I grew up as one of the only Asian American kids in my school, when we were, like the only Asians in town almost was like my family and the people who worked at the restaurant. So that was a huge part of my identity. And, I think even if I had wanted to assimilate, like blend in and kind of disappear, I think it would have been impossible, because so much of my story was tied to her family, Christina's family owns the restaurant. Like that was just like who I was in the town. And so I grew up feeling like I was the most Asian person who ever walked the earth. Like I was just so Asian in this town. And then when I went off to college and, kind of explored the wider world, I was like, oh my gosh, I am like the whitest country girl who has ever walked the earth. I like listened to country music and like, like didn't grow up around Asian Americans, didn't have Asian American friends. And so it's been a real journey to like kind of figure out who I am and figure out what my voice is. And that's a lot of the themes in my books are like, figuring out your voice, what you're worth, what you deserve, where you belong. Those are themes I just keep coming back to, I think, because of my story. Mike.
Well, I also seem to have a lot in common with both of you in terms of our family stories. My parents both immigrated to Los Angeles in the mid 60s. And they came to LA in order to study. It was never their plan to stay in the United States. They were always going back to Korea. But things were settled in Korea at that time. And more and more of our family members kept joining them in Los Angeles. So I was born in LA and lived there for my first 9 years. And I feel like my childhood had two very distinct like phases in terms of, race and culture, because living in LA, we had a lot of family around us, and there was a huge Korean population and a huge Asian American population. And so it was not like being in company of other Asian people was not something that I lacked or missed. And then my dad got a job offer, he was offered a promotion with a jump in pay and on all those things. And he accepted it, and we moved across the country to northern New Jersey, which was milk white by comparison. So I also very much at that point, like one of the few Asian kids in our school. It was me and my brothers, and there would occasionally be like one other Asian I would see, but that was a very alienating experience, and one which I didn't really fully grasp and understand at the time as it was happening. Because my parents tried to keep us, engaged with like Korean communities, mostly through church, but our family ended up attending a church that was an hour drive away. And so it was, first of all, because I was like 12 years old and not really into church to begin with, like that it was an onerous experience just to go there. But then the families we spent time with there, we really only saw them there. And in order to like actually interact with them more, it took what felt like a significant effort on everyone's part in order to get together. And so we did that, but my daily life felt somehow very separate from that, And so I was actually I struggled in a lot of ways, not just because of race, but also because I'm autistic, and so that presented another whole set of challenges that I had to claw through. But I was that one Asian kid in the white community who did try to assimilate for a long time and to a really extensive degree, to the point where there are all these connections to my ancestry that I didn't deliberately sever, I would say, but were severed over time anyway. And that it's taken me a long time to get back to try to reconnect with them and restore them. And, doing that through my books is one of the ways that I've done it. There's a way my story feels, I don't know, very common, right? Like Asian American child of immigrants navigating white world. And there are ways in which I often think about like, you can argue that that's been like the single story of Asian Americans in literature for a long time, and maybe not so much anymore, but that gives me a lot of pause and a lot of food for thought in terms of like, how do I represent my own experience, and how do I bring those things into books in a way that that's thoughtful and layered, and that isn't actually just piling onto the existing, pre-existing single story, but is actually exploring it in a way that is more true and more probing and more real. So that is a thing that I'm very much working out in my all the time. And so Veera, on to you.
Yes, well, I loved hearing everybody's stories and how I sort of, there's so many connections and intersections in all of them. And so, we're all talking about this diversity of all of our experiences. And it's interesting, Mike, that you say, that sort of single story, but I think that, as writers, maybe it can seem like almost a single story, but I think the more specific we get into how we do navigate what we're, even if it's often an Asian American kid navigating in a white world, we all have kind of come at it in such specific different ways. And so my way is that I grew up in Connecticut, and my father came over in the 60s from India and met my mom in Poughkeepsie, because of course, right? And my mom grew up in Brooklyn, and she's Jewish American. And so they met in Poughkeepsie and got married in 1968. And both of their families were not actually happy about their marriage. And they basically eloped, and they just celebrated their 53rd wedding anniversary. So it certainly wasn't an easy journey. And then they decided to settle in Fairfield County, Connecticut. Sometimes I wonder, why did they choose that area? Because growing up in that area, I definitely felt like the only one of me, and there were very few Asian American kids. I don't think there was one Indian American kid in my class. There were a few Jewish kids, and certainly not, half Indian, Jewish, Hindu, somebody who really reflected my identity. And I really felt growing up like I was literally the only person on the planet, me and my sister somehow, inhabiting that identity. And of course that wasn't true, but that is really how it felt. And we went to a really small private school that I write a bit about in The Whole Story of Half a Girl. where there were like 50 kids in the school. The school was started by my parents' friends. And so it was just this real extended family from first to fourth grade. I went to that school. And then the numbers were sort of dwindling in the upper grades, and my parents were worried I wasn't getting sort of a like well-rounded enough education, because it was a very arts-based progressive school, and we made a lot of pottery there, and it was incredible. It was a really incredible experience. But so when I went to the public school, it was such a shock to me. I didn't know how to be in that kind of school, and 25 kids to a class. And that's when in fifth grade, kids started to ask me about my name and make fun of it and not be able to say it and say weird things about my background. And I just suddenly felt so other, but I didn't until that point. And so that was a huge change, even though it was from a white community to a white community. It was just, I was treated so differently. So that really stuck in my head and became a huge part of my identity and a huge part of what I write about and sort of carry with me.
Wow, I just love, I could sit here all day and listen to your stories, and, seeing how we're connected and how we have different experiences. Mine was a little different, but a little similar to some of yours. I am third generation. So that means my grandparents were the ones who immigrated from Japan to the United States. And then my parents and then my sister and I were born in California. I was born in San Francisco and I grew up in Los Angeles. And kind of like Mike was saying, there was no shortage of Asian Americans. And in fact, I had a fairly large Japanese American friend group and a lot of relatives. So, and in fact, my mom used to invite my girlfriends over for the Japanese celebration of Girls' Day, which is a day honoring girls. And she treated it like a birthday party. And in that way, introduced my non-Japanese American friends to this Japanese tradition. And in fact, in middle school and high school, I remember wearing t-shirts with Japanese sayings on it, like Ichiban and I'm with Baka, which is like I'm with stupid. And we had rising sun stickers and we'd put them on our notebooks. And in fact, when I was in college and I had my own car, I had a wink mirror, those racing mirrors, and I had a rising sun sticker on the front of it. And anytime my dad needed to borrow my car, he used to take a piece of cardboard and cover up the sticker. And I'd ask him why he did that. And he'd say, for you to drive around like that, it's cool. But for me to drive around like that, it makes a statement. And I grew up in a family that did not really talk about things or emotions. So I didn't really understand what he meant by that. And it wasn't until I graduated from college and moved out of California and ended up in the Midwest that for the very first time in my life, I started to feel othered. First off, I was oftentimes the only Asian in any setting, in any room. And people would ask me weird questions, what I thought were weird, where are you from? How do you speak English so well? And that's when I understood what my dad was talking about suddenly. So, okay, so how we just shared a little bit about growing up. How does your experience that you shared influence the books you write? And is there a specific example that you can share from your life that has showed up in your books?
Well, first, I want to say thank you to everyone for sharing your stories. I think there are pieces of them that just resonate with me, even though we may not have, had the same exact experience growing up. There are definitely a lot of similarities. And I wrote about a lot of what I was feeling when I was growing up in The Many Meanings of Mei-lan. Just to tell you a little bit about the book first, it is about a 12-year-old girl. She's Chinese American. She was born in the United States to immigrant Chinese parents, but she lives in a big extended family in Boston, Chinatown. And Boston, Chinatown, and I think many Chinatowns across the country are, very tight-knit communities. And when I moved to Boston when I was 13, it was such a shock to me to walk into Chinatown and everybody is speaking Chinese or some dialect of Chinese, because there are multiple dialects. And it was amazing to me that this community, they spoke some English, but it basically existed kind of like in a bubble. And my father was a polyglot and knew whatever dialect he needed to get us to the head of the dim sum line. He just would cozy up to the host and, speak to him in his native dialect, and we were immediately ushered in. And it was just this wonderful, tight-knit community, and I really, liked going there on the weekends. And, I didn't grow up with a lot of formal Chinese restaurant food. I mean, Christina, your father started a restaurant, which is amazing. When I lived in Ohio, we had to drive an hour away to find a Chinese restaurant that was acceptable. Well, in the 70s, maybe that was even just the closest one. But Mei Lan grows up in this very tight-knit community. She's surrounded by Chinese people. She speaks Chinese. She's bilingual. And her extended family has a falling out when her grandmother dies, and they've been squabbling over the family bakery. And so she and her parents and her grandfather pick up and basically sort of go on this cross-country road trip. Her father's not exactly sure where they're going to end up, and they eventually end up in rural Ohio. So it's sort of a reverse of my own childhood story. Instead of growing up in Ohio and moving to Boston, she does the reverse. And suddenly she finds herself surrounded by, a majority white community where she definitely feels othered. On her first day of school, the principal renames her from Mei Lan, which he thinks is too exotic, to Melanie. And she's trying to cope with this loss of her name, and she's struggling with her identity. Her father's homeschooling her in Chinese, and because the Chinese school is 2 hours away, and she discovers that there are 14 different meanings for the same homonym of her name. The Lan part of her name has 14 different meanings depending on what character it is. So she assumes these sort of different personas in different situations. She settles on 3 of them. So one's for home, one's for school, and one's for when she's sort of by herself. So she's really struggling and coming to terms with her identity and finding her voice. So as far as a specific example from my childhood that made it into the book, I would say that I grew up speaking for my parents because English was clearly not their first language. And they were proficient, but they had an accent. And under the guise of teaching me and my brother how to speak on the phone to strangers, they would make us call everybody. Like if they wanted to know the times at the movie theater, or they wanted to know when the store was going to open or close, they would pick up the phone. They'd tell us, here's the number, you're going to call, you're going to ask. And I just sort of accepted it. But looking back now, I realized that they probably felt a little awkward. Maybe they had been teased for their lack of grasp of English or for their accents or whatever. So there's a scene in Mei Lan where, as they're traveling across the country, a waitress makes fun of Mei Lan's mother for ordering crab cakes. And Mei Lan eventually says, her English isn't broken. Her English is just fine. It's just the way she would have said it in Chinese, translated literally word for word into English. And this is what she said, and this is what she wants. So, and from then on, Mei Lan sort of speaks for her parents in public situations. So that was very much a part of my childhood too.
Well, I can't wait for that book, Andrea. Yeah, I remember my dad he speaks English very well, but with an accent. And I remember as a kid being in public with him and feeling really protective of him, like always kind of like I wanted to like be listening in case people were like making jokes that he wouldn't understand about him or something like that. Like it's an awareness of your parents and how your parents are different that I think other, like white Americans don't have. Excuse me. Anyway, and just, oh my gosh. And in Watercress, I know this is a middle grade panel, but I have to just say, like, Watercress, like, hit me so hard. That book, there is so much in that book. And how many words is it? It's got to be like 500 words.
It's right about 500. Yeah.
And there's so much meaning just in that book, and about how, the moment that hits you when you're a child of immigrants, that you realize you're never quite going to understand what your parents went through. You're never 100% going to know them and the way that they were before they came here, where you were born. Anyway, okay. I think, as far as like how my experiences affect my books. I mean, I've written kind of more explicitly about that. I'm working on a memoir right now. We just got announced, so it's a graphic novel memoir, and it's about it's like the true story of me trying out for cheerleader in the 7th grade. And in 7th grade we had to try out in front of the whole school. You would have to go out into the gym with one other person, so you had a partner, and the entire school was watching you, and you performed your cheer. And then after that, the school voted for who they thought should be cheerleader. It's like, yes, I see the looks of horror on your faces. It was a horror story, but also like so funny, and so like so much awkwardness. And so that's like very literal, part of my story. I also write Diary of an Ice Princess chapter book series, which I use Debbi's chapter books so much as like mentor text for my chapter books. And so in that book, like, she's an ice princess. There's so much magic and fantasy in it, but her family is a really big part of the story. And the main character is so different from her family. So I think that was like something that I was always working on as a kid, and I'm still working on as an adult, is that my story is so different from my ancestors' story. But how can I connect with them? How can I still be like a part of this line? Like, what am I carrying on from them at the same time of being different and like making my own way? So that's like kind of what she's dealing with in this like 1st grade, 2nd grade chapter book. And then a Wish in the Dark. This is fantasy, and this came out of, as a kid, what I loved to read the most was fantasy. I read all like Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Tolkien, all the Roald Dahl books, everything. And, I never read anything that wasn't set in like the British Isles or New York City. Like, to me, those were the magical places. And so A Wish in the Dark, which is set in a magical Thai inspired world, is really me trying to say, there are other places in this world where the culture is so rich, the place is so rich, it can also be magical. It can also inspire a magical setting. And so, that's really where that story came from. So not at all about my background as growing up, but yeah, those are some of my books and the stories behind them.
I am feeling a little more emotional than I expected to be during this panel. Just from hearing what one is saying and how much it's striking me level. So 1 second.
I totally get it. I feel the same.
I get it too. Yeah. It's tough to negotiate all these complicated emotions.
It is, and they're all still in here, right? And like, I have spent a lifetime, I've spent a big chunk of a lifetime not examining them, or not interrogating them, or not trying to sort of process my way through them. It's a pretty recent thing that I'm trying to do that. And in terms of my work, I feel like, I've written 3 books. I seem to have a novel come out every 4 years. So I'm like the president, right? New book every 4 years. And I feel like in terms of approaching my experiences as a Korean American in America, that each one is sort of taken a different tack, or looked at a different angle, or not looked at a different angle. Like my first book, Geeks, Girls, and Secret Identities, is a superhero book. It's about 3 boys, one of whom is Korean American, who that their hometown superhero no longer remembers how to be a superhero. And it turns out because, and he's you know, like your classic 6'6" muscle-bound spandex wearing guy. And it turns out that because his secret identity is actually now has changed, that it's now a 12-year-old Korean American girl. And so I deliberately made the choice to have my main characters be Korean American because I wanted that. And that was, again, not a thing that I had like always thought about, but a pretty recent thing in terms of when I first started writing a manuscript, when I thought, oh, dang. And yet in that book, I don't really address the topic of race or culture at all, I think. And I've had friends tell me that there is an element of that in the book and that it's thoughtful. And one friend whose opinion I really respect, saying like, you really did this in terms of approaching race and, you know, questions of immigration and wealth accumulation and religion. And I thought, really? Because I thought it was just like a superhero and a giant robot big thing in there. But it wasn't conscious, you know. And then my second book, Unidentified Suburban Object, this was, I mean, Geeks it was autobiographical in a very strong way, in that it was sort of about like my thoughts and feelings of friendship and how difficult that was, and having like a very small circle of friends, and that's it. But USO, I really wanted them to put the main character Chloe Cho on the cover of this book. The story of this book is it's about a 12-year-old girl, Korean again, who is trying to explore her racial heritage, and she lives in a very white town, like a lily white town again. She won't get any help from her parents. They will not share things with her. They do not talk about like their past and their lives in Korea, which is like a direct mirror of my experiences with my parents. Like there are some places where they just wouldn't ever go. And then the big twist in the book is that she finds out that they're actually immigrants from another planet, a planet where actually all the aliens on this planet look Asian. And so there were some very deliberate things I was trying to do with this book. Like I wanted to explore this dynamic of intergenerational communication gaps about experiences that were traumatic, right? Like how does trauma get both communicated and not communicated, and how does that affect succeeding generations? I wanted to address like pop culture and like the assumption of you know the defaulting to white as the thing for everything, including aliens. And I thought, I'm just going to have this planet where everybody looks Korean, and that's it, and I'm not going to explain it. But I think the biggest thing that comes across to people is that it was about Chloe's experience of just dealing with racist microaggressions every minute of the day, all day long, which was also like a very big part of my own experience growing up. And she's a very different character from me, but a lot of the things that she experiences in the book are directly lifted from my own life. And then a very different tack with Boys is that the Boys is not about race, and it is about a Korean American kid and his white best friend. And this is the thing I've had conversations with friends about quite frequently since I started writing the book was, how do I approach that? Like, how do I approach this question where I have this Asian American boy and his Asian American family, and they are very westernized, you know, they are pretty deeply assimilated. And how do I present that in a book where it's not like just accepting it, right? Because on the one hand, I feel like that was my experience growing up. And I was oblivious to these things when I was a kid. So there's a way in which I could have my characters be oblivious to it and have race not like actually play a role in their lives as I depict in the book at all. And there's a way in which that would feel authentic, but I've realized that would only feel authentic to a certain part of my own individual internal experience. And I thought, the conclusion I came to was that writing a book in which in which that is the way that I present it, that cultural assimilation and defaulting to white as the norm in an unexamined and uncritical way is actually a way of enabling or maybe even contributing directly to like that default to the white. It is actually a way of enabling white supremacy is the conclusion I came to. Because the fact is that in those days, in those moments, in those times where I was not aware of all of the racial dynamics going on in my daily life, they were still going on, right? The reality of it, the bigger reality was that it was not some sort of race neutral experience that I had really at any moment. And I thought that the way to really approach this is to try and present that experience in a way where there is maybe an awareness level on the part of the characters that I didn't have myself, but I need to make the reader aware of it, even in instances where it's not being explicit, even if it's times in the book where Matt Park, my main character, is not actually experiencing explicit racism, but those dynamics have to be there and visible and obvious and clear. And he does experience quite a great deal of racism during the course of the book. And again, those experiences were almost verbatim lifted from my life. Like this is I think the most autobiographical of my vast oeuvre of 3 books. And it's because the friendship is very much modeled on real life friendship that I had in high school, so I had to age it down. So very autobiographical in a different way. Very informed by my own experiences, but also very informed by a lot of the thinking that I've done over the past 10 years, and especially the last 5 years, in terms of what does it mean to represent on the page? What does it mean to put down a single experience or one individual experience on the page in a way that is honest and true? And I think that I had to expand that beyond the bounds of not just the character's awareness necessarily, but my own from different parts of my life, if that makes any sense at all.
Oops. Okay, I was unmuted and then it does make sense. And, listening to all of you, I'm getting like my brain is just being lit up in so many different ways. So, now I don't even know what I'm going to say, but I will go back to the question and then bring in all these ideas that I had from what you guys were saying. I think that, the whole story of Half a Girl was definitely my most autobiographical first novel. And I wrote a lot about that experience, about a girl having to leave one school and go to another school and then have to confront her biracial interfaith identity in a way that she never expected to, and experience a lot of microaggressions, and then how does she process it? And, part of that was my father, when he came here, and I think it certainly has to do with the generation too, assimilation was hugely important. And then he married a white woman. And so there was this feeling when I switched schools, and I did for different reasons than the main character Sonia does in the book, but there was a part of me that just, got hit with all this stuff at my new school. And I was kind of like, to my parents in my head, I don't think I really confronted them this way, but I was like, why didn't you tell me that things were so complicated and people were so racist and like all these things that I got hit with and had sort of no idea about, because I was just in such a protected world. And my parents, I think, maybe kind of hoped it would just go away a little bit. They sort of got through what they got through. They managed to kind of deal with their own families and kind of integrate the families, and any conflicts in the beginning were sort of worked through as much as they were worked through. And, my mom was more the social leader in the family. And so most of my parents' friends were Jewish, white and Jewish. And then the main contact of other Indian American kids was my extended family on my father's side. And I had a lot of cousins and I was very close to them. We all lived like in Fairfield County. So that was really good, but not in my social world, that wasn't a part of it. And so, and I also, my parents were very secular, so I didn't go to Hebrew school. I didn't do all of that. So like my Jewish cousins were doing things I wasn't doing. And I felt like nobody wanted to talk about it. And I really didn't know. I really didn't know where I was supposed to fit in, or what I was what should I be more than one thing or another? How was I going to hold my identity? And so I have been working that out in my books, and also looking, I think, Christina, you said, thinking about experiences you weren't part of, but that you're kind of holding, that are still a part of you. So like looking into what my father's family went through during the partition of India, and trying to imagine what that might have felt like. And then in my new book is kind of influenced by my parents' decision to get married. So I'm writing a story about a Jewish 12-year-old girl whose older sister falls in love with an Indian American college student in 1967. And it's right after the Loving versus Virginia ruling. And so her older sister falls in love, and then they decide to elope. And so the girl is sort of left with her parents, her Jewish parents, who are not happy about what's happened. She has to sort of deal with the fallout and understand her own Jewish identity, kind of in the middle of the context of the civil rights movement and the Loving versus Virginia ruling, and seeing why her parents are not, are upset about the marriage, and that she's sort of upset at them for being upset. And so I'm kind of exploring a little more of my mother's side of the family. And so I think that through my books, I am kind of healing that sort of that space where I didn't know how to kind of unite my identity. And I feel like, well, I don't have to really create this sort of perfect oneness. It can be kind of multifaceted, and I can explore it in different ways with different books. And that's okay. So that's something I try to do.
Oh my goodness, this is so fascinating. I just hearing your stories and how they influence your books, and like throughout multiple books, I can just sit here all day and just listen to you all. It's just so interesting and fascinating. And I was thinking about what Mike was saying, the first book where, people are saying, oh, you layered all this stuff in and you feel like you didn't do that intentionally. And that's okay, because that's one of the things I always say about the authenticity of the stories that we tell. We've lived these lives, we've felt these emotions, and they just naturally, I think, leak out into our writing. And to do it with more intention also is so important. I think for me, for Keep It Together, Keiko Carter, which is basically a story about a 7th grader dealing with changing friendships, a little toxic friendships, and first crushes. But the main character is Japanese American. She's Hafu, so she's half Japanese American and half Caucasian, like my daughter. And it was really important to me to be able to tell a story that was mostly focused on friendship. Friendship fascinates me. I don't think there's ever going to be a book that I write that doesn't focus on friendships and relationships. But it was really important to me to be able to tell it from a main character who identified as Japanese American. And while the book is mostly about changing friendships and first crushes, there throughout the entire book is this thread of microaggressions. And I did mention that I didn't feel othered until I was an adult, but boy, it hit me as if I were a child, because it was just so shocking and new to me. And of course, my daughter growing up experienced. We talked about all the microaggressions that we experience all the time and still do. So Keiko has a crush on a boy who has moved from the Midwest, and he says things to her that surprise her. Things about, oh, your last name is white, so how can you call yourself Asian American? Or, you're really good at math and all these other things. But because Keiko has grown up with, a diverse friend group and never really thought about this, is very shocking to her. She doesn't know what to do with it. And she's a bit of a people pleaser, as I am. So she doesn't speak up. She's internalizing it. She knows it feels weird. She doesn't say anything. But along the course of the story, she starts to realize that she needs to speak up. And that's kind of my trajectory. You know, I grew up, you know, don't make waves, don't bring attention to yourself, be nice, don't make people dislike you. And all the way to now, in full grown adulthood, where I'm just starting to find my voice and be able to speak up to people and say, you know, that I don't know what you mean by that, but that sounds racist to me, or why are you asking me what I am? What difference does it make in this conversation or in this context? So that is my piece of me that I've inserted into Keep It Together, Keiko Carter. And I think probably in every story I write, I think in all of our stories, right? Pieces of ourselves are finding their ways into our stories. And that's why it's interesting when I hear you all talk about this is the most autobiographical book that I've written so far. And I'm thinking to myself, well, mine must be coming, because I feel like while there are pieces of me in the books I've written so far, I can't really call them autobiographical yet. So something to think about. Which takes us to our next question. Why is it important? And we've talked about it a little bit, but why is it important to you to write the books that you're writing? Andrea?
I am unmuted now. Thank you. That's such a good question, Debbie. I think first and foremost, I'm writing because representation matters. I'm getting emotional now too, Mike. I did not see myself in books growing up. I think the first time for a lot of us that we saw ourselves was in Amy Tan's Joy Luck Club. And that didn't come out until, you know, high school, college, etc. So I really want to write books where kids can see themselves represented. I want them also to be not just mirror books for Asian kids, but window books for white kids and non-Asian kids, so that they understand the Asian American experience a little bit more. And hopefully they'll spark conversations, because I feel like I'm trying to talk a lot about identity and those complicated emotions around being half in one world and half in another world, the push and pull between cultures. So I hope that, you know, non-Asian kids will talk to their Asian friends and, you know, be like, wow, is this what it's like for you? And Asian kids hopefully will be like, hey, here, read this book. You know, this is what it's like for real. But also just to get all of our stories out there. I think that's so important, to show all the different facets of being Asian American.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I remember when I was a debut author, I was on this panel. It was like my very first panel at the Texas Library Conference. And the questions for the authors, one of the questions was, what are trends that you see in the publishing field? Like, what trends have you noticed in the publishing field? And there was an author who was sitting next to me, and she said, you know, I think that the diversity trend is a very, you know, is a positive thing, but we have to make sure that the books are good, that they're quality. And I was just like, oh my God, what? Like, I was appalled, but also I had never occurred to me that people thought that books, because they're not written by white authors, would be anything less than quality. Like, to me, the reason our stories are so important is because, like, they are the best. They're great stories, right? Like, they are high quality because they're telling the truth and they're telling our stories. Like, I think that when I look at all of your books, I think that they crack something open, you know, like they crack open a secret about what kids are going through, or what we went through, or what people in history went through. And that's like what literature is supposed to do. So, you know, I think if books are supposed to give us, you know, a greater connection to other people, you know, help us understand our humanity more, then they have to be these stories that we have to tell. Like our stories have to be a part of that, or it's just half truth, you know? So sorry to rag on the person on that panel with me, but I just remembered it. So yeah, that's why I think we're important, because we're the best.
I mean, I'm not going to argue with Christina about that. We are the best. I've been thinking about this, and each time I feel like I've got an answer in my head, I say it out loud, and it's like word salad. When I first started writing my first novel, my thought really was just like, I want to write a book that I would have liked to read when I was a kid, and that means a book that's fun, that's got like a guy in a cape and a mad scientist who builds a giant robot in his underwater secret headquarters that he's going to use to destroy the city, and boom, that's going to be awesome. But I also knew from the start that I knew I've been writing in one way or another for a long time. So I kind of know what my interests and my focuses and my strengths are just in terms of craft, right? Like I tend to write stuff that I think is funny. And at the same time, I also like to try and infuse like the all of the crash bang stuff and the humor with like a degree of real emotion, you know, something that an element that is meaningful on a personal and emotional level. And so I knew that I was going to try and do that. But those things like fun, you know, humor and heart, like my understanding of them has deepened over time since I've actually been writing books and getting them published. Because the idea of like humor like that, it's a much more like complex and interesting sort of thing to focus on than I had originally thought about, because as I've gone farther into it, I've gotten much more into thoughts of like, you know, what is humor? What are the mechanisms? What are the things that drive humor? What are all the different sort of social dynamics that go into how we understand what's funny and what's not? And, you know, why certain people think certain things are funny. And the same in terms of like the heart portion. It's about like, what does that really mean? Like, it's not just the ability to make someone feel good. Like, you wrote a nice dog story and the dog is alive at the end of the book and people really like that. Not that I'm discounting dog stories. I love dog stories. But that's like a really sort of, you know, surface way that I will often think about it. The dog's alive, when really the heart of it, to me, I've come to understand much more, is like, again, what are all the dynamics that happen between people, right? Like what are the dynamics between friendship and in family relationships and in communities? How are those things affected by larger forces, societal forces? And how does it change the way that we have to manage things and change the way that people experience the world? And so it really started to become clear that those are things that I just could not actually stop sort of thinking about once I've had the realization. You know, I was invited to join We Need Diverse Books when it was founded, and I was not like in any kind of a leadership position. I was like, you know, I did my part, but that was a real sort of awakening point for me as well, getting involved with that kind of work, because it really did show me that, like, okay, there are these entire realms of thought and understanding that I have just not been dealing with, right? And that I realized, oh, I have feelings about those. So, okay, I can approach those feelings. I can approach all these new insights and levels of information that I know are out there now, and try to like have them really inform my worldview in a substantial and meaningful kind of way. And I think that just can't help but affect our work, you know, because, you know, as much as I talk about geeks and saying like all this stuff in there that I didn't intend to get in there, it's like, well, that is actually, like Debbi said, that's what happens when we wwrite books, right? We do bring the whole of ourselves to it, including all the subconscious stuff that's milling around inside us. That's not always going to work out, I think, in a healthy or positive sort of way, because with my first book, there are some choices that I would make differently, I think, if I was writing that book today. You know, I have a character in there who's a police officer, who's a Black police officer. Like, that is not a choice I would make so lightly and blithely as I did when I first wrote that book. I didn't like interrogate that choice at all. And so there's some things like that where I feel like my awareness is different now. And there's no going back, right? Like, putting that genie back in the bottle is just not doable, and I think not desirable in any way. Like, that, it's a more complicated way to approach my work, but it's a better way. It's a more meaningful way. It's ultimately, I think, going to be a more connected and engaged and really sort of intertwined way to approach it, in terms of both how I'm engaging with the work and how hopefully readers will engage with the work. So.
Yeah, I think that, you know, we are always changing and learning with each book. And I think we all seem like really kind of, we have our hearts open to the world and sort of what we want to learn about ourselves and society, and then, you know, putting that into the next book. And I hope that, you know, while I'm in kind of my sort of journey of growth, of understanding my own identity and myself, I hope that I can kind of take the read that too, in some way. And I also think that I write, certainly for the books I wish I had. We you know, I think people who are marginalized often say that. But I think we say that because it's really lonely. You know, they're just, to feel othered and to feel like something about you, just who you are, the way you came into the world, is like causing a problem for other people. It's I think the first time you realize that, whether you're a child or an adult, is so confusing, and then it's also a very lonely experience. And so I'm writing books to keep kids like me company, really, to feel less alone. And then, of course, anybody else that sees themselves in whatever way, because I sort of would, of course, see myself in certain ways because I had to. So there were ways where I was relating to characters in like Roald Dahl books and Judy Blume and whatever, because that's what I had. So, but I hope that it does make kids feel less lonely.
Yeah, basically everything you all said is how I feel. You all said it so eloquently. And, you know, we are writing the books of our hearts. I think that's the most important thing. I was thinking about, Veera, what you were just saying about, you know, looking for books that make us feel less lonely. And, you know, none of us, I don't think, grew up with books where we saw ourselves not only physically, but also the kind of lives that we lived and experiences that we've had. When I was starting out trying to get published 20 years ago, and I kept thinking, I think I'm going to have to write like a immigrant book or a World War II book in order to get published, which is not what I wanted to do. Those books are important, but those weren't, you know, the books of my heart. My books of my heart were about friendship and first crushes and things like that. And I remember my daughter, my daughter started reading middle grade just about the time that Lisa Yee's Millicent Men Girl Genius came out, and Linda Sue Park's Project Mulberry came out. And that, I looked at those and like, yes, that's what I want to do. I want to write contemporary stories with Asian American, Japanese American characters who are experiencing life in the US or whatever. And I remember my daughter looking at me, and I think she was like 12 at the time. And she said, Mom, Japanese Americans can fall in love. Japanese Americans can have dysfunctional families. Japanese Americans can have fights with their friends. Where are those books? And where indeed were those books? And I think that's why I write the books that I write. These are the books that I would have loved to have read, and I think my daughter would have loved to read. So I think we just keep doing what we keep doing. And before we leave, each of us are going to recommend an AAPI middle grade book that we love. But I want to thank everybody for being here. And if you agree with us that there need to be more AAPI books, please support us by buying the books, by going to your library and asking for those books, and hopefully the publishers will follow and publish many more books. My Japanese American experiences that influence my writing is just one Japanese American experience. There are many more different Japanese American experiences out there. So thank you for being here. And now we're going to recommend some favorite books of ours.
Thank you. And yes, what Debbie said, please support AAPI authors and illustrators. And thank you for listening to our panel. I'm going to recommend two books, Stand Up Yumi Chung by Jessica Kim, and I created a cover for The Last Fallen Star by Gracie Kim because I read it in ARC form, but it just came out. Both of them are excellent. Gracie Kim and Jessica Kim are both Korean Americans. They share the same last name. They're both amazing authors. They are not related. So I just want to point that out. We are not all related. But I love that Stand Up Yumi Chung is about a girl who wants to become a stand-up comedian. And, that's sort of unusual and fresh premise. And, she deals with a lot of microaggressions as well. Her family owns a Korean barbecue restaurant. And so the kids at school call her You Meat because she smells like the barbecue meat. And The Last Fallen Star is about Korean mythology. And it is about a young girl who is adopted into a Korean family. So you would think, oh, she looks like she belongs to them, right? But in her adoptive family has magical powers and she does not. And so she feels very othered even within that community. And her sister, her adoptive sister, tries to share her magical powers with her. And everything goes wrong. Her sister's life is on the line. And of course, she has to set out on this grand adventure to save her sister. So I love both of those books. Please do check them out. Thank you.
There's such great recommendations. I have two also. So I have Finding Junie Kim by Ellen O. Talk about the secret stories that our families are carrying with them, right? So this is a wonderful, wonderful book. And then More to the Story by Hina Khan, which is a modern twist, a modern retelling of Little Women starring a Pakistani American family. And Ellen is Korean American and Hina is Pakistani American. Love them both.
Okay, the first book I'm going to recommend is Henry Lien's Pea Sprout Chen, Future Legend of Skate and Sword. I blurbed this book. I said it's thrilling, beautiful, fierce, and not like nothing I've ever read before. And it's a fantasy novel about this girl, Pea Sprout Chen, who leaves her home nation in order to attend an academy where they practice this art form that's a mix of figure skating and martial arts. And it's this like pulse pounding adventure story that's so thrillingly layered. It's got so much going on there. And Henry does this amazing job of world building. And then it's just devastating. And then you get to the end and the end just like hits you like a hammer blow. And then you're like, oh, I got to read the next one. Unfortunately, there is a next one. There's a sequel called Pea Sprout Chen, Battle of the Champions. So phenomenal, one of a kind of book. And then, Remy Lai got a lot of well-deserved attention and critical acclaim for Pie in the Sky. And I'm very excited for her next book, Picasso, which is coming out in just a few weeks, I think. But I feel like her second book, Fly on the Wall, like went under the radar a tiny bit somehow, which may be just me, but I think it's up to the standard of her other work because it's about a boy who lives with his family who they're like very, very overprotective of him for reasons, but he is at the point in his life where he's starting to resent it, and now his family goes and visits his father who lives in Singapore. And so for the first time, since his parents split up, they are not actually going to go and do that over the summer. And so they've got to stay home things are not good. things are not good at home. And so he concocts this plan to actually fly to Singapore by himself and defy all the expectations of being this kid who is like the crier and not capable of taking care of himself, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's like sort of very much Remy's signature level of humor, like what I was talking before about humor and heart, right? Like there's this sort of almost like madcap kind of humorous tone to this book that at the same time approaches like very substantial and meaningful topics that it could be easy for those two sort of things to clash, right? Like this like goofy, super goofy humor, and these really sort of like deep and intense familial dynamics and personal dynamics, and it's this very intricate dance, and she pulls it off so well. So strongly recommend both of those books. You should get Picasso too, because that's going to be soon. And on to you, Veera.
Okay. So I forgot to bring the books right here to my desk, but so sorry to Padma Venkatraman, who I'm going to recommend The Bridge Home, which I loved, and it's about two sisters in southern India who are kind of navigating as orphans, sort of the world where they are just trying to survive. But I think that Padma does such a great job writing about pain without sort of bringing the reader there's these constant sparks of hope and joy in their survival journey, which I really love how she does that. And then the other book is Red, White, and Whole by Rajini Laraka, and I blurbed that. I have read it on an e-arc, so I don't even have it anyway, but I love the cover to that book, and also just how the main character has to an Indian American main character has to navigate between both worlds, and also dealing with their mother's illness. And then there's this like 80s pop music thing sprinkled throughout, and that book is in verse, and it was great. So get them both.
Okay, and my books that I'm recommending, this one's an older book, but it's one of a favorite of mine, The Way to Be by Kat Ye. It's a story about friendship, of course, because that's what I gravitate toward. But the main character is starting 7th grade. She's feeling isolated and alone, so she starts writing poems in invisible ink and tucking them away. And one day she starts getting responses. So there's a little mystery and maybe a little bit of a crush. But yeah, I absolutely love this book, and I recommend it all the time. And the other book is Eva Evergreen, Semi-Magical Witch by Julie Abe. It's a fantasy about a girl witch who isn't quite very good with her magic, and she really wants to prove her worth. And the setting is inspired by Japan. And I blurbed this book, and I said it unfurled before me like a Miyazaki film, because seriously, while I was reading it, that's kind of what I saw in my head. So I hope you all will read all of these books and all of these wonderful panelist books and more. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.